Good morning. There's a lot we can talk about from today's gospel reading. I don't know if you ever heard the New Testament is concealed in the Old, and the Old is revealed in the New. In these parables, Jesus is alluding to passages in Daniel and Ezekiel. One in particular is Ezekiel 17, I think 17, 22 through 25, where it's predicted that a new kingdom would be planted, a new kingdom of David. We're going to talk in a minute about the mustard seed, and I want to come back to this. But first, let's talk, and Jesus did a good job explaining the parable of the wheat and the weeds, but I want to look into it a little bit deeper. You know, at first glance, we might think, well, of course, we're the wheat. And, you know, all the evil people in the world, they're the weeds. But is that the case? If we've ever walked into the confessional, we were at one time weeds. Do we strive every day to be the good, healthy wheat, bringing life into the world and the salt of the earth? Or do we fall? Do we become weeds? Or maybe we just resemble weeds? The second parable talks about mustard seed. And this might surprise some of you, but the mustard plant is like a weed. It's very invasive. We go back to Ezekiel's passage where God was going to plant a new kingdom, and he planted his son in his death and burial, and then this new kingdom sprouts up in his resurrection. The church has been full of weeds since its inception. We can, a good example is Judas. But it did sprout up to be the mightiest of kingdoms, the largest kingdom and longest standing kingdom ever. But it's full of weeds. I talked about, this has been a few years ago, so I don't know what the statistics are now, but there's, I think, a little over 2 billion Christians on the planet. 1.2 of them, I think it's 1.3 of them, are Catholic. Over 70% of that 1.3 billion don't go to Mass anymore. And out of the less than 30% that still come to Mass, 70% of that number don't believe in the real presence. Do you think there's a few weeds in the church? The first parable points to us. We have the choice. We were given that awesome gift of free will. And when we choose sin over God's will, we're abusing that awesome gift, and we become weeds. There's no love without sacrifice. Do we sacrifice, well, I got this, I can't break this one particular sin. It means too much to me. Or do we picture this? I've said this before. We're holding one of two hands. There's no point in our lives when they're not holding any hand. We're either holding God's hand, and we know that nobody can pull us from his hand. If we're not holding God's hand, we're holding the hand of Satan, and we're a weed. There's no in between. Let's look at the weeds in the church. We remember Jesus warning the 12, be aware of the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The third parable today talks about yeast that the woman put in 3 measures of flour, of wheat flour. 3 measures of wheat flour is about 50 pounds, so that's a lot of flour. And we have this little bit of yeast. That little bit of yeast was our Lord and his teachings. We can compare our Lord and the good yeast to the Pharisees and Sadducees' bad yeast. But what yeast does to the flour is make it rise. So we can be that huge percent of the Catholic Church and rise with bad yeast. Don't come to Mass. Don't believe in the real presence. Missing out on all the graces we receive through the sacraments. Or we can rise because of the good yeast. Be the light of the world, salt of the earth. Before we go to bed at night, we should be examining our consciences. Was I a weed today? Did I resemble a weed today? Or was I healthy wheat, sharing God's love? Things to ponder on, because I know we all want to hear, rather than be tied up in a bundle and thrown in the fire, we want to hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into my rest." God bless.